Hi, welcome to the CSU Writes webinar on AI and what PIs don't know. And this is, for thinking about principal investigators of the code for faculty or others who work with graduate students or other researchers, either as supervisors or as co-authors, and thinking about how do we talk about AI. So the reflection, well, it's a group reflection for you attending the webinar. It's for you to think about how are you currently using AI in your writing? How are your co-authors using AI for writing? And if you don't know the answer to that question, that's an important thing to note. What do you see as the strengths or the opportunities of writing with AI? Maybe you're highly knowledgeable and highly skilled, or maybe you're just curious. That's fine too, whatever your knowledge level. What do you see as the limitations based on what it is that you know? And then how comfortable do you feel talking about your AI use or your collaborators' AI use in writing projects? So these are questions that we will return to as we move through on talking about AI use in general, and then also thinking about guidelines. But the last one in particular, like how comfortable you feel talking about that, will come up pretty quickly because we're going to talk about like how do you talk about this. But your comfort level will perhaps grow over time the more you have these types of open conversations. This is my hope. And so having the talk, this is, just any of those talks that make us a little bit squeamish, a little bit uncomfortable. And often talking about our rating, by the way, makes us a little squeamish and uncomfortable, even if we're not talking about assisted technologies like in generative text or things that would help us edit. So if you've been using Grammarly or other kinds of AI for years, you may be more comfortable and open about how it is that you've used it. If you're just coming to this new and you've kind of in the past kept everything close to your chest, all of your writing, and then you're experimenting and including more use of AI in your writing for either editing or for generating content and kind of starting points for your sentences, then it might be a little bit trickier for you to have those conversations at first, but just know that getting comfortable with how it is that you're using AI in your writing is going to be really important. In part, having open conversations about what you're using, where you're using it, how you're using it, is going to be crucial when you go to submit, whether it be a proposal for funding or a manuscript for publication, making sure that you are clear on how it is that you've integrated and used AI on your portions of any document, but also how your team has, if you're running a team, how your graduate students have. We've had instances where we've had now graduate students who have put forward dissertations for defense, and then have, by the time they get to the defense, everyone's read it, and then it becomes apparent that the graduate student has used a significant amount of AI support in the crafting of it, and now is accused of plagiarism. That was not approved by the committee. It was not okay. So having open conversations with your contributing authors, your graduate students, your postdocs, other researchers that you're working with about AI is essential for you to be able to move manuscripts forward now. Being able to have an open space for that conversation and be able to disclose is absolutely essential. We ran a table conversation last year on AI, and one of the things that the tabletop folks at the workshop came up with was that when it comes down to it, the fundamental thing that we must do is disclose. We must have a conversation with one another. And that's true now at journals, right? Asking folks to disclose, acknowledge their use of AI, but also then in your collaborative writing relationships. You might just want to consider how prepared do you feel to have that talk? And it can help to have some definitions and some context for the conversation. If you're feeling a little bit squeamish or feeling like you're less prepared for that conversation, you can get prepared for sure. If you need to learn on the way, you can also open up and to say, I'm learning through that space. But it's helpful to have some guidelines. So according to the Artificial Intelligence Risk Management Framework, which we have links to here at CSU, if you look through our guidelines for authors through our RICRO office is what it used to be called. But you'll be able to find this publication. And if you need to have access to it, I'm happy to send it to you. But the AI RMF refers to the AI system as an engineered or machine-based system that can, for a given set of objects, generate outputs such as predictions, recommendations, or decisions influencing real or virtual environments. They're designed to operate with varying levels of autonomy. And so for us, the key is, predictions, recommendations, decision influencing real environments. These are what is produced or given to us, and as text, we're talking about AI in terms of writing here within this context, but it could, in terms of this webinar, but within this definition, it could also include the illustrations that you're creating to go along with your manuscript or proposal. It could also include any kinds of code that you may be using. So there are additional ways that AI will be contributing to the work that we do as researchers and scholars. We're here just talking about more specifically in text or textual generation and editing. Those are kind of my specific interests in talking about AI in this webinar. And so what do scholars and journals and the media say about it? Well, gosh, in 2022, 2023, those were kind of big times for thinking about like, oh gosh, there's a kind of this kind of explosion now of what it is that we can generate or do with text and AI. And we know that the science in the new age is much broader than that. And of course, looking at medical, and health kind of impacts and the tools and what we might be able to generate through artificial intelligence all the way through, can we just express ourselves a little bit better? Or can we write poetry like Shakespeare? So this kind of new age that we're in lets us know that ultimately predictive writing support is not that new. It's if you're looking at kind of being able to identify what might be coming next in a sentence, that's super helpful. And Grammarly was a kind of front runner with this and being able to do support at the grammatical structure level, right? Of being able to predict and help with word choices or identify errors and encourage writers to go back and kind of fix those and replace. But note that in this predictive writing support AI software system, at least in how Grammarly used to operate, that's not going to be so much the case in the future, but that it was working with your existing text. It was starting with what you wrote first or your graduate student wrote first, and then helping identify challenges with that phraseology or those word choices so that those could be corrected. And so it's a great tool. It remains a great tool. They are moving more towards broader generative kind of capacities so that they're not just predicting, but now that they're generating text. Studies have pre-existed our interest in ChatGPT or launch of Claude or other things, but so here in this kind of call here for artificial intelligence in the conduct of literature reviews, note that AI has been looked at for a long time about how we might be able to pull together extensive readings and be able to use AI to synthesize that, and use it to synthesize data, right? So there are ways that we use artificial intelligence in our processes of reading and writing already pretty fluidly. I think the concern becomes when we're talking about the generation of text that's going to be given authorial credit. And so that's something that we want to consider more of. Thinking about publishers, they've banned, right? ChatGPT being listed as an academic author. Initially it was, but the kind of question like, well, can we just list it? It seems to be writing our text for us. And I'm saying, yes, this is good text. And so we might as well just, keep it as an author. And the key is that the ChatGPT will never be able to be an authority on the topic that you are are asking it to be an authoritative. It will never go and give a keynote address. It will not be an invited speaker. And so the key with authorial credit is that someone listed in that author's list or as the single author is responsible for all of the content that's and can speak to it, the content that's in that published document. This comes from the Chronicle of Higher Education, and that there's little agreement on the rules that should govern it. And I'm talking about ChatGPT in faculty writing. And this is true for the guidelines that we're going to talk about in a few moments here at CSU and considerations and conversations. But so I think most of it does have, most of the conversations do have to do with undergraduate education in particular, because that's the place of greatest concern on what gets manufactured and how it is that we're going to change our teaching and our assessment now that we have ChatGPT, right? But what I love about Ben Kissinger's point here, and the end of his piece, by the way, this is a quotation I'm pulling. So this reminds us about that key of disclosure and the purpose of transparency and giving credit where credit is due. So he says, for the system of trust to hold in academia and what it is that we do when we put our work out there and engage with engage with other people's work and trust that it is legitimate, that we must firmly and rapidly commit to transparency around the use of AI. Only then can we hope to have informed, reasoned discussions about what norms and rules should govern academic writing in the future. And this conversation here in this webinar is really about, can we have conversations more broadly about those rules that govern our partnerships and kind of how it is that we work together, how we collaborate together, and then what the output of that collaboration is, which is always going to be a piece of writing, right? Even like we're talking about additional proposals or additional manuscripts for publication. It could be dissertations. It could also be, things that are submitted for degrees, but it can also then be patents or other things that require text. And so what are our rules for how it is that we're going to engage with AI and bring AI as a tool into the work that we're doing and generating those texts that go out there into the world? This is a colleague of mine from the Consortium of Graduate Communication, and he's at the University of Delaware. And he has published and written extensively about why it is that he is, I was going to say rapidly, but he is like radically, but maybe rapidly as well, anti the use of AI assisted softwares in the use of producing writing, particularly at the graduate level. So this is from his own blog, but he has published in the Teaching English as a Second or Other Language and their connections. And he's also spoken at the Consortium on Graduate Communication as a keynote on why it is that he believes that we need to be highly, highly skeptical and then resistant to the automatic use of AI. So we've been talking about it as being something that up in this webinar to this point is that it's just inevitable, that it's going to be something that's a tool that we have to acknowledge that we will be using in the future. I think that to just pause for a moment and consider Nigel Kaplan's position is worth it, because, to what extent are we really cautious? What I want us to think, and he says that there's a response that if we can read through, and he, like, okay, I see what you mean. And his response really is about, there's copyright infringement, there's an invasion of privacy, there's replication of bias, there's a huge environmental impact, there's a de-skilling of the teaching profession, plagiarism, misinformation. And then he says, oh, but look at the social benefits, and this is, and all of those questions that he has about bias and environmental impact and plagiarism, misinformation are legitimate. And we must acknowledge those as the risks that are inherent in our use of AI. Without that, we're writing kind of ignorantly on what the impact, the broader impact, not just the impact on the impact factor of whether our piece gets published or whether we, get cited, or whether our piece or our proposal gets funded, but there are additional impacts by our choice to use AI and to use it as a tool, or to have our graduate students or our postdocs or collaborative writers, our colleagues, we use it as a tool. So to the extent that you feel comfortable having these conversations in greater depth about perhaps the ethics or the value of using AI, this could also be something that you bring in as part of your conversation then. I love this description, and this is something that is probably very familiar to many of you already in your labs or departments. I see it a lot in writing retreats where we have a variety of technologies that we use to be able to produce our writing. Right? So I love this opening, and this is, it says it's abstract, but this is actually the opening paragraph from Research Writing with ChatGPT, a descriptive embodied practice framework. And this is from Computers and Composition. So this is a research piece, but it starts off with this lovely description of an observer, right, looking at a writer, writing research, writing with this ambient light, right? Providing a purple backdrop. A dark-haired PhD student in computational biology and bioinformatics sat facing no less than 5 open reading and writing surfaces. Looking over his shoulder from behind, it was possible to spy one tablet displaying reading material, a smaller tablet propped on a desk with a screen full of application icons, a notebook full of handwritten notes. And then, of course, if you move through this description, we wind up with AI being part of this process of the generation of this research writing. So how is it that your graduate students, your PI, or your postdocs, your collaborators are using AI, and for what value and support? She's using it here in this place to identify coding errors, but also to find research on particular topics. So all of that should be logged. All of that should be recorded, so it's clear how it is along the way people are using AI in the construction of their research projects. We don't do it for our Moleskine journals or our spreadsheets for the most part, but for any of our significant softwares that we use in our methods or putting together projects, we do acknowledge. Thinking about university guides and guidelines, right now we don't have great guidelines, if I may say, for research writing. It's still so fast moving. So we have some guidelines, and some of the ones that we have at CSU that are kind of most consistent and helpful are those Joseph Brown in Tilt and his work with student conduct and advice on artificial intelligence, particularly for professors in the classroom, and using the syllabi statements, or in here, how do I AI proof my assignments, or how do you teach well with AI? But ultimately, it all comes down to also what is disclosure. You need to be clear with your expectations with students and your syllabi from the get-go, and then have them disclose if they're using it or not. Otherwise, we wind up with issues of student conduct code infringements, right? So if they're using AI that's unwarranted or under disallowed in the classroom, then it does count as plagiarism or a form of cheating, and they're receiving unauthorized assistance on those assignments. The libraries are doing a great job, though, in providing some initial information on artificial intelligence literacy. I love that, AI literacy. And they get a number of different pages that you can go to and for resources. And you can think about like researching with AI, kind of what do you have in order to be able to support your reviews, or putting together other resources, teaching, learning, citing. But so let's take a look at one of their resources that they link us to, which is how to cite AI tools. And I think this is something that's crucial if we're thinking about how do we acknowledge and how do we give credit to having used AI. How do we make it open and disclose it? Well, here we talk about like software citations and how it is that we include those. Maybe those are common in your field, maybe less so, but they will likely become more common. Transparency in systematic reviews, and making sure that if you are using AI for a systematic review or a broad kind of standalone review that's published on its own, that you're disclosing that use. It may not be that you need to cite it with just general literature review in another kind of article, but check with your publishers and make sure that you're clear on the guidelines before you're using AI in ways that will not be accepted or possible for that, or accepted for that publication. That you want to be able to acknowledge your AI writing support just in general. How is it that you've used it? That way you can disclose that. So thinking about acknowledgements, how did you use it? Describe that. And then you can uphold accountability. And so what it does is it allows for you to remain accountable for the final published content. And again, thinking about how AI cannot be listed as an author. You are listed as an author, right? Your other human co-authors, contributors are listed as authors, but AI will not be. How you've used AI, though, needs to be integrated and divulged. University of Toronto, one of my colleagues there is at the School of Graduate Studies, and I think that they've done a really good job with their frequently asked questions. And so I'll take you through only this one, and then there's a list, and I'll kind of use that list to guide some of the places where I can see for our future purposes at Colorado State University, we might want to be giving some additional guidance and thoughts about. But you could look up their guidelines anyway, their frequently asked questions, which is super helpful. But one of the things that they've addressed, very much like Nigel Kaplan, is if you're working with graduate students as co-authors or in their development of manuscripts that will be going out for publication or proposals for funding, does generative AI will hinder the development of graduate writing skills? And my argument would be that we develop our writing skills across our career span. We are continually growing as writers. So it's not only at the grad level, I would say it's across the career span. But here where it's regulated and where you have theses or dissertations or original work that needs to be accredited to a single scholar as being judged worthy of meeting the basic credential kind of guidelines in order to be able to be, worthy of a master's or a doctorate. Well, then we need to be able to think about what are the skills that we expect those students to be generating at the time that they're generating those documents or developing at the time that they're generating those documents. And so it's not clear yet what the use of AI ultimately would be, but we need to be cautious. I like their response. And for some reason, I've got a missing page there. There we go. So can students use AI? Does it impact their writing skill development? Can they use it to edit? These are all great questions, right? Can they use AI tools to do research and do other kinds of research kind of gathering, like the literature review, other products? Can they use AI as just a general research tool? How secure is that? How should they use to describe and reference those AI tools? If they're generating, does that mean that they're allowed for writing? Can works be submitted for publication using those AI tools? Are they accurate enough? What are the copyright and intellectual property implications? And who's responsible for that content? Well, I think we have a lot to learn about writing in general continually, but I think we have a lot to have the conversations about with AI. Just some guidelines for you in thinking about your co-author agreements and your own co-author relationship. Find out what your guidelines are and to avoid awkwardness, have that conversation as early as possible. And make sure that you understand the journal guidelines in advance of writing. I think there's a great piece on strategies for effective collaboration and manuscript development and interdisciplinary science teams. And we've talked about this in past collaborative writing workshops, and I just highly recommend Oliver et al.'s piece. They're ecologists, and they have developed some guiding principles of making sure that you understand that transparency is a principle, and you do that. You engage and use transparency in your understanding your team composition and using it to create a co-authorship policy and just being clear at the outset. Inclusion and fairness is part of this. Protection and promotion for those who are building their careers, all right? Accountability for everyone so that everyone gets fair credit. efficiency, productivity, and creativity as being these kind of ways that you co-produce together. It's great guiding principles. And they have, some authorship guidelines that they put together that are co-generated as they move through, and just some clear guidance. Again, if you're going to have conversations about your writing, you also now need to be having conversations about how you're using AI. For them, this is, this gets a little bit closer in, and you can kind of just see the general information that they're including in their kind of setup for the conversation. And then they just have instructions where everybody gets to add in to that information. The writing portion, though, notice that category 3, the writing of it, there's not much there. Who wrote what sections? So co-authorship is determined based on any number of other factors. And AI, by the way, might be used in any of these, in interpreting the results or drafting figures or tables. So be clear with folks right off the bat where it is that you not only want them to be adding in what their contributions are, but how it is that they've created those contributions, and if they've used any AI within those processes. Basically, what this means is, like, if you develop guidelines for authorship for your projects, which is, I also highly recommend that you have these conversations early on about co-authorship in your teams or labs or collaborative, partnerships, that you add AI to those guidelines and how it is that you come together and decide what's best for your group. And you want something that's revisable and dynamic, right? That collaboration and a co-author guide. And here, listing ChatGPT as an author, right, is not possible. ChatGPT cannot be an expert on your subject matter. So note that it's banned. I don't know what journals are accepting ChatGPT or other AI as authors currently. So just keep that in mind, that you want to go with your publisher's guidelines. And take care when you use it to disclose the ramifications and the risks of being exposed are great. Surfaces and interfaces, there was a piece, published, and there are hundreds of these now, by the way, articles that have been either retracted or pulled and revised. But here was one where, the introduction just is certainly, here's a possible introduction for your topic. And it was very clear that AI was used, but it didn't get caught before it went out and was published, which suggests some challenges at this journal, but also just note that the risks are substantial if you're not disclosing openly. So some of our collective takeaways this workshop, thinking about if you're going to be using AI, and particularly if you're working with graduate students or others as developing researchers, you want to think about how it is that they're developing their research and writing skills, and how is AI being used in that, and ask them to be open in that conversation. I like Boris Streepy's sentient syllabus project. I heard him talk at a conference in 2023. But he talks about how co-writing with AI must always start with first your own thoughts. And that's crucial, I think, if we're working with others. And we want to know what they think. We don't want to know what AI thinks. We want to know what people think. For us, and knowing what people think, just know that Helen Sword is coming on October 24th. She's going to be here for 2 sessions, a morning session and an afternoon session. You can attend both if you want, or just one. One of them will be on writing intelligently with AI. The other is on creative approaches to research writing. And so look for more information through the faculty list, but also then through some emails from CSU Writes to be able to register for those. And the book club, so that's coming up in November. So now is the time to start reading if you're interested in teams and how teams operate well. Daniel Goleman, he's one of the early writers about emotional intelligence decades ago, right? When he was criticized for saying, well, there's no such thing as emotional intelligence because we don't have any data on it. Well, now they have data. And so this is his response, and talking about the value of emotional intelligence for creating optimal performance for individuals as well as then for teams. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at any point in time. I'm happy to share resources and other materials and have conversations about writing. All right, everybody. Take care, and until we meet again, may your writing be brief, frequent, low stress, and highly rewarding.